Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Sounded pretty good to me.
Yep.
All right.
One of our best.
Excuse me.
That's how the episode opens, right there.
Maybe. We'll see how it goes. Hello and welcome everybody to the Wordy Pair Podcast. As always, I'm Rudy.
And I am Justin. And
we are going to be talking today about one of Justin's books. This book called The Rackon. We've mentioned it occasionally, but this is me being overly sensitive, but I feel like we talk more about the good guy than we did about the Rackon. And so I figured maybe it'd be fun to talk about your foray into existential horror.
Crappy book, crappy author. All right, next subject. What are we talking about for real?
That's all I had.
Wait.
We did that, though. We did that for the good guy. We did a YouTube episode where we were making fun of the good guy without making it known that you were the author of the good guy. Maybe I'll link to that because that was a fun little chat.
Yeah, I will say, just because it's so funny how it worked out, the idea behind that, somehow our signals got crossed when I brought this idea up. I wanted to do a fake review of the good guy.
Right.
And I wanted it to be like a roast of the good guy.
Right.
And I don't think you understood at the time.
I did not.
That I meant really, really roasting it just for kicks. Because you kept trying to say good things about it. And and at the end of the episode, we were more than halfway through it. And you were like, yeah, I didn't know that we were supposed to really be trashing it. And I was like, yeah, that was the idea.
Yeah, you outmaneuvered me there.
But yeah, we do, and by we I mean I bring up the good guy a lot on this podcast just because I had so much fun writing it, and I read it all the time too, so it's always fresh in memory.
Yeah. So
anything that we're talking about that relates to it, it just kind of, hits that spark, and I feel the need to talk obsessively about it.
Sure.
Like a schoolgirl with her boy bands or whatever.
Yes, the hippin' and the hoppin' and the bippin' and the poppin'.
That's right. And all the electric boogaloos.
Yes. So instead of talking about the good guy today, we're going to focus on your other main book project thing that happened.
Which I feel necessary to point out that 2 minutes into us talking about the other book, I had already related it to the good guy in some way.
Yes, I expected this.
But the Rackon is fun too. So your first little semi-question was about... Well, no, you said diving into existential horror.
Yeah, existential, cosmic kind of horror. There's a lot going on there, but all of it is pretty horrible.
Yeah, I said that already. I said it was a trash book by a trash author, and we can move on.
Horrifying.
Apparently we're gonna talk about this. So what made me write it? Is this a reasonable question?
We can start there if that sounds reasonable to you. What other places to start might be like, what's your favorite part of it? Why did you structure it the way you did?
Questions.
Okay, so the Rackon. Okay, so you wrote this gigantic chonker of a book called The Good Guy, and it has 5 chapters, one of which is a third of the book. Yeah. And then you wrote the Rackon, and the Rackon is more like a short story anthology than an actual novel. It has parts that are only tenuously connected with the other parts of the book. So what What got you into the mood to make a book this way as opposed to the way that you organize The Good Guy?
That's actually really simple. At the time that I started writing it, I was not writing the book. I was writing the first and second chapter.
Okay.
Because I wrote the first chapter, and that chapter was called Morelia's Capsizing.
Yes.
And it was about a solar system that was mysteriously vanishing.
Right.
It of course has some problems that I worked out later on. Like I like to take an idea and just write it out, and then if there's some conflicting, if there's a conflict in the science, which I don't do hard science like you do.
You do not, no.
Some of it can easily just be explained as, this is just supposed to be some fun science fiction.
Yeah.
But I like, for the most part, for it to make sense.
Sure.
The factor in these stories that makes some of it make sense are called stretch fields, which is basically interstellar transportation. Interstellar teleportation.
Right.
So, in this first chapter that I was writing, I just wanted it to be a story with a couple of key points. I wanted it to be a horror story, because I was fresh off of reading some Lovecraft for the first time in my life, and I was like, I understand now why this is really good.
Yeah.
And I would like to have a horror series under my belt. So I came up with a character who was a little meek, a little bit timid, and a kind of a soft genius, like really smart, but the character's not centered around how clever she is all the time.
Sure.
And I added a bit of a damper on that by making her a capable pilot and engineer, but at the same time, her father sits at the head of an empire of like a technology empire, not like an empire government style,
like a
but
corporation,
like a corporation.
Or okay.
Yeah, he heads Navapar. So she's basically a corporate princess who decided that she wanted to strike out on her own and prove that she could earn things herself.
Yeah.
So that kind of it sort of holds back that whole desire to take a character who's really intelligent and make her the focus of everything.
Mm-hmm.
The story is told first person through her. But as you're reading her, you're not reading her as someone who's calculating everything that's going on and being an internal genius.
Yeah, she's not that kind of egotist either.
Yeah, she's not really. Every once in a while, a little bit of that might come out, but that's one element I wanted, because a character like that, who's looking at everything from a lot of the rational standpoints, will fit well in a horror story where things are happening that are not easy to explain.
Yeah.
Then I also wanted to have a crazy character, because I love having crazy characters in stories. So the first character, the genius girl that comes to work on the ship called the Rackon, is Country Kitchen, because I do not do normal names.
Right.
And I am really glad that I picked the names I did, because as the story, you can hear my dog barking, can't you?
Yeah.
Excessively.
Yeah.
Interesting. Should I hold off and try to wait until the dog...
What is the dog barking at? Is the dog barking at something?
So have you ever seen any of those videos where an ape will get angry and hurl itself at the glass cage it's in and scare people that are viewing it at the zoo?
Yes.
Yeah, she's like that if she sees anyone outside, and she watches at this corner where you can see like 3 blocks away over a field. If
Wonderful.
She sees someone walking all that distance, she will fling herself at the door, and you'll just hear her banging against the screen door. It is absolutely hilarious and off-putting.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll just have to deal with it. I guess we'll just have to kind of suffer through it, because it sounds like it's not going away.
Just pretend it's fans cheering me on.
Yeah, that's what we'll do.
That's what we'll do. I totally have fans. I use them to keep cool at night. So the second character I had was named Milk Muffin.
Right.
Again, for weird reasons. Now,
Are there reasons behind these names that make sense, or are they just whimsy?
They are whimsy. I've mentioned it before when we've done episodes about naming characters and naming things, and I kind of just throw words and syllables together. Like if I've got a weird name that isn't a real word, that's from me throwing around a few syllables and just trying to come up with something that sounds like it'll fit the character.
Okay.
In this case, I think I named Milk Muffin first, And then I kind of had a soft theme going for how I was going to name people.
Mm-hmm.
So, you had milk and muffins, two things you find in a kitchen, and then I got kitchen, and then I was like, okay, well, let's see, what other word will go with kitchen? I don't know where I got country kitchen from exactly. I think it sort of
probably
popped
the
into my
Cracker
head.
Barrel.
Not the Cracker Barrel, more from watching a show called Keeping Up Appearances from Britain in the 90s.
Okay.
And she was always going on about this country home she had in a couple of episodes. So I think some of that might have just jumbled up in my head, and thus Country Kitchen was born.
Okay.
The name thing worked out really well because I kept getting to make I kept making jokes throughout the book. Country thought that her name was perfectly normal, and she thought everyone else had really weird names. So she makes a comment in the first chapter about how Milk Muffin's kind of a weird name, not a good normal name like she had, but whatever. And then we move on. It's just a little running joke.
Okay, sure.
And she even has a friend in one of the chapters that she refers to. Her name is Pulpy Peanut.
Uh-huh.
And it's another one where she's just like, why can't people just have sensible names like I have?
Yeah, right.
But at its core, I just wanted these two character types. I wanted her and the crazy character. Milk Muffin is the captain of the Rackon. It's a medium size, which basically means gigantic cargo ship that they use to do courier tasks, salvage missions, rescues, just work for hire, essentially.
Sure.
And the first chapter was the only thing I was originally going to write, because I was going to have this crazy character. Country Kitchen finds out that her captain drinks heavily and uses a lot of drugs that she shouldn't be using.
Right.
And Country is threatening to quit over this very shortly after she takes her job on the Rackon.
Yeah.
She's talked down from quitting by the only other crew member, which is she thinks it's an android when they first meet. It ends up being a guy who was in such a horrible accident that 80% of his body was mechanical.
Yeah.
And he worked on the ship because apparently Milk Muffin was the one who saved him.
Uh-huh.
I never tell that story in that book. I'm saving that for a future book, but they mention it once in a while how she's the only reason that he was able to survive that. And Milk Muffin has enough money from her work that she was able to actually construct for him a body that was technically worth more than her ship.
Uh-huh.
Now, at this point, just as an aside, I've mentioned it before, and it's, we have a podcast named The Wordy Pair.
Sure.
And that comes from the Japanese novels and anime of a similar name, The Dirty Pair.
Right.
Now, I'm a pretty big enjoyer of Dirty Pair.
Yeah, I mean, you've gotten to the point where you've even read a couple of the novels, I believe, right?
Yeah, and I haven't
which most people have not done in America.
Yeah, there were only 2 that were translated into English. There were 5 total. I have not read the ones that weren't translated, but I also haven't been able to find them easily in paperback.
Yeah,
so
I mean, you'd probably have to take a trip to Japan and scour used bookstores for them.
Yeah, or I can find someone to deliver it to me. Something.
Or eBay, also.
Yeah. I think I checked eBay back when I was writing the Rackon, and I still couldn't find anyone selling it. But
well, the thing about eBay is that you have to check more than once.
Yeah, it's been a while. But anyway, the point is, I remember we were brainstorming names for the Wordy Pair, and I kind of just, half jokingly floated, why don't we make something? We came up with the Wordy Pair talking about the Dirty Pair. Why don't we just have something like that we can have as an inside joke, or explain it in an episode?
Yeah.
Which I believe was our first episode. I think we explained it.
We mentioned it at the very least, yes.
Yeah. Well, the Rackon was supposed to be my Dirty Pair. It wasn't the same story type. It wasn't the same idea. It was loosely related because it took place
because there were 2 women on a ship that did things.
Yeah, 2 women on a ship that took on missions.
Which, by the way, is way better than what you could have done, which would have been some kind of horrible fan fiction.
Yes, because it would be obvious if I had just written fan fiction of the Dirty Pair. The 2 characters I have in this story are not really like Kay and Yuri from the Dirty Pair.
No, not at all.
So it's all very loosely related. However, the engineer, who his name is Colas,
Mm-hmm.
which I won't even explain that name. It's a joke that's in the book mentioned once, and it's not super funny, but it's there.
Right. I'm
He's
not
the ship's
disagreeing with you.
engineer,
Yeah.
and he also has this mechanical cyborg body that is able to do things to the ship.
Yeah.
Interact with it
Wait a minute.
wirelessly, connect with
Wait
it
a
in
minute.
different
Wait a
ways.
minute. Wait a minute. So, without spoiling it, there's a character in One Punch Man who's a cyborg named Genis, right?
Yes.
There could be a Genis in his family, couldn't there?
Oh my god, there could.
Okay,
Actually,
just checking.
I wonder if that was in the joke. I wonder if that name was in there.
I don't know. I can't remember if that's in the book or not.
I don't think it was.
I don't think it was. I think you did different.
I missed a golden opportunity.
Well, maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, because I like to play around with things like that, and I'll get into that when I talk more about the characters. But
right,
he is based largely off of Moogie from the Dirty Pair, which was this giant Black Panther thing that Kay and Yuri had on their ship.
Yeah,
and it was a species from a planet that had these. It had kind of like tentacles, little tentacle things or antennas on its head that
it was a weird
to
creature.
Control their ship. Yeah,
I mean, let's be clear. It was a very strange creature.
It was very strange in
it was vaguely cat-like, but then not.
Yeah. Yeah, and in the cartoon it was more dog-like and it didn't really do quite as much. In the books it was a much more prominent character.
Oh, okay, interesting. I haven't read the books, so.
Yeah, it's more panther-like, and Kay rides it into battle at one point.
Oh.
And they mention a lot more that it has the antenna that can manipulate their ship, which is called the Lovely Angel.
Right.
The Dirty Pair's real name are the Lovely Angels, but because
right.
of their bad reputation for destroying things, they're called the Dirty Pair.
No, it's not their reputation for destroying things. It's their reputation for being on missions where everything gets destroyed and it happens to not be their fault directly.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, like we can take a 2-minute aside here, but the Dirty Pair series is very funny and very satirical and very and a very solid little story that I find you know kind of has a bit of that pulp sci-fi feel to it with the kind of aesthetic choices that only come from Japanese brains, all mixed together into something that is actually pretty entertaining to watch. And it's one of those things where you listen to what the premise of the story is, and you're like, oh, this is going to be some kind of thing, and it's like, no, it's not.
It's interesting because the two books that I read,
right?
And the translation was great. They are two of my favorite science fiction books of all time. I don't know. Have you read them yet?
No, I have not.
Okay, they are solid and fun, and like you said, pulpy science fiction.
I'll have to check them out.
And they're written from a first-person perspective, from Kay's perspective.
Okay.
I think at the time that was why I originally decided to write the Rackon in first-person perspective.
Okay.
Because I didn't really do much of that up until that point.
Sure.
And then I thought about it, and
wasn't the good guy in the first-person perspective?
What's that?
The good guy was in first person, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I wrote the Rackon first.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, the Rackon was the first full-size novel I published.
Oh, I thought that the good guy was. How did I screw this up? Okay, weird.
This kind of got the ball rolling because when I realized how much fun I'd had writing first-person perspective for a full novel, I kind of wanted to do it again before I went back to doing something in third person.
Yeah, this is a story that I somehow managed to miss.
So I probably never told this story.
Possibly.
So Morelia's capsizing came out of wanting to do something similar to the Dirty Pair.
Yeah.
Having just read a bunch of... I read all of Lovecraft in 2 days.
Yeah.
And that prompted me to really crack down and start working on a sci-fi story I had brewing where I wanted it to be like the Dirty Pair. Now, it's not really like the Dirty Pair since I introduced the Lovecraft stuff, but it's got those roots.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't be surprised for Lovecraft stuff to show up in the Dirty Pair. It's just that it kind of didn't.
Yeah.
But your characters are very different, so it's not... It doesn't feel like as I already mentioned, it doesn't feel like a fan fiction. Because it's not.
I think in the end, after I had all these elements fall into place, and I wanted to have this crazy captain who the we can kind of call Country Kitchen the main character. I wanted to have this captain that she had a lot of problems. And she was using a lot of drugs, but it became apparent early in the story that she had to because of things that she had seen from an arcane horror kind of perspective, I guess.
Yeah.
She had witnessed things that had driven her mostly crazy, and so the drugs were the only things keeping her sane.
Yeah, right.
So the process of Country Kitchen discovering this was an upsetting one, to say the least, and she quickly realizes that part of her job on the ship, she's supposed to be the head navigator, in which she's the only navigator on the ship, but they call her the head navigator.
Yeah. Well, it looks
her
better
job
on
is
a
also
resume.
Yeah, but her job is also to babysit the captain when she's freaking out.
Right.
There are times where she will find Milk Muffin curled up underneath her captain's desk and just like shaking and muttering to herself, and she has to coax her out.
Yeah.
There are other times where she will have to administer the drugs to Milk Muffin that she normally wouldn't want her to take because it's the only way to keep her going in an emergency.
Right.
It's not the best situation, but she sticks with the job after that first chapter. Now, that first chapter was supposed to be the end of it. I was going to have a story where there's this weird thing happening to a solar system. They go out to investigate. They find something that is kind of horrifying and actually has wide-reaching implications for all of humanity. And they decide it's best just to report back that, it's a roaming black hole is destroying the system. And that's actually where I hit my first scientific hiccup.
Mm-hmm.
That I reflected on later, because the reason they were sent was because someone was observing the solar system and seeing it vanishing, or they were observing that parts of it were gone, which means that they were seeing something through telescopes light years away. Now, I didn't explain how that was possible because I didn't think of it when I wrote it, but having gone back and read it, my explanation that will probably just be an offhand line in a future story. It was just going to be that they actually use the stretch fields that allow them to teleport. They use the stretch fields for everything in these stories.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of an insurance thing where you can pay for insurance that activates stretch fields that will refill air in your suits. Right. So if you run out of air, you have this service that gives you more air while you're out in deep space. Spacewalks are not a dangerous thing much anymore in these stories, except when you're encountering space horrors beyond mankind's comprehension.
Right.
But for the most part, humanity has worked out a lot of technical details using this one technology. Yeah. And Morelia's capsizing is the opening story for the Rackon, which points out that, there's a major problem that humanity is not aware of involving this one giant important piece of technology that they use.
Right.
And that was supposed to be the end of it.
But you just couldn't let it go. You just couldn't let it go.
Nope. I had to beat this dead horse into the ground and write a second chapter. And the second chapter was only born out of...
Wait.
It's not the first...
If beating the dead horse into the ground was the second chapter, what was it by the sixth chapter? Just mush horse deep in the Earth's mantle? How much of this horse did you beat? Good Lord.
The last character is called Pulpy Peanut, and there was definitely some pulp when it got to that horse. So
okay, fair enough. Second chapter.
So the second chapter, what did I even name that chapter? Country on the Rocks. I named it Country on the Rocks. And it was only written because I felt like the characters I had created were so good that they warranted at least a second story.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a simple story. I wanted to do a story that took place in an isolated condition where the characters couldn't really do much about the situation they were in.
Yeah.
And long story short, because it is a short story, the point is, Country goes out to do a spacewalk. They're trying to retrieve a black box from something that was destroyed. And I had the idea at the beginning of the book that there would be this fun little bit of messing around with science fiction technology from their time, where she
Sure.
gets like this little space scooter and gets to take a bit of a drive out between some asteroids and have a look at some planets and whatnot while doing a spacewalk. And she gets to her destination, and she's close to retrieving the object. She's on this little chunk of rock that's floating next to a larger asteroid.
Yeah.
And she just sort of happens to be clutching this rock as there's a violent shaking.
Okay.
Now, without, dragging it on too long, I'll just say
Without spoiling the story.
There's something on the rocks above her that she can't see, but she becomes aware of danger.
Right.
That means that she essentially cannot leave. She can't retrieve her scooter and get back to the ship, but she's still in communication with Country Kitchen and Colas on the ship. And so they see the problem. They don't necessarily want to explain to her fully what it is.
Because it'll make her move. Like, I remember her being, like, terrified of moving. She felt like revealing her position, basically.
Yeah, she felt like the vibration through the rocks would be enough to trigger whatever had happened, because she saw something. She saw an object that was snatched away suddenly, and she essentially froze in place and was just too afraid to do much of anything. So the whole story is her communicating with Milk about how they're going to solve the problem.
Right. And
they eventually do. It was kind of a fun, tense moment where she's isolated from the rest of the crew, and she doesn't have any options, whereas she's entirely reliant on them, but she doesn't have much perspective on what's going on with them. So it's just a fun little, oh my god, this horrible thing happened, and there's also a creature. There's always like some kind of creature or some...
Well, so, yeah, I mean, this one kind of is reminiscent of one of those stories where Lovecraft starts talking about a monster that you never actually see, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like it has that feel to it.
You do sort of see it in this one, but it's brief glimpses of something that can't be explained and that they have to flee from.
Right.
So that story was another... I think that's my favorite one out of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
The whole scene where Country is trapped on that little piece of rock is probably my favorite part of the entire book. That story, again, was going to be the end of it. And at that time, I had been messing around with Smashwords. I'd been putting a couple of things up, mostly short stories, and I actually took Country on the Rocks and Morelia's Capsizing as individual short stories and published them on Smashwords.
Okay.
And they kind of sat there for a while in limbo, and I kept, looking back at them and saying, especially that second one. I really like that second one. And eventually I talked myself into saying, okay, what other kind of horror story would I want to write? I'm trying to remember. I may actually have to look. I don't remember the exact order. There were 6 stories in the book, and I don't remember what the third one was. But if I go ahead and go to my phone here and pull up the old Kindle app and give Rudy a lot of extra cutting stuff out work, as you do, I can bring up the Rackon and have a look, assuming that I'm quick enough at finding it, and that it actually opens to the... Oh my god, I'm really giving you a lot of work, aren't I?
Well, the best part is that if you're going to keep talking, I won't know that this is like a thing that I need to cut out. Like, if it were silence, I could just cut the silence, but now I need to, like, look for this.
I am a horrible person. Yeah, so the third chapter... I believe if anyone was going to say there was a weak point in the book, it was that. Because someone specifically told me that was a weak point in the book. I don't feel I had any problem with it myself, because I wanted to do a weird kind of monster thing that presents a piece of a universe that technically nobody could do anything about. And it was the weirdest chapter in the book, without a doubt.
Sure.
It's a brief respite after everything that happened. This is kind of what Rudy meant when he says there's little connections between the chapters, but they're not really one full novel.
Right.
Now, here they're just off the Country on the Rocks story, and Country's kind of stressing out, and she's like, we need a vacation. We need to go take some time off on planet side. Milk Muffin is not good being off of her ship. That's where she likes to be. She doesn't really enjoy going planet side for much of anything. So they find a nice planet to go hang out on, and it's kind of funny because just a quick bit of humor. The cover of the Rackon shows Milk Muffin as it's a black woman on the cover. She was supposed to be kind of Indian, but I didn't really go too much into detail describing her in the first chapter.
Sure.
So the person that drew the cover was just like, oh, this is a black woman. I think because I said something about had an almond tone or something. And I had been picturing something completely different. But she was supposed to be a little bit based off of Kay from The Dirty Pair, but also a little bit based off of Vincent Raleigh from...
Raleigh Vincent.
Raleigh Vincent. Raleigh Vincent from Gunsmith Cats. I don't know. I watched the anime.
Sure.
And she was Indian in the cartoon, not the comic book so much. In the comic and the cartoon.
She was half Indian, I believe, in both of them.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the background I wanted for Milk Muffin, because secretly I was brewing this idea in the back of my head where I wanted to drop hints that maybe somewhere in her bloodline she's descended from Doc Savage without directly saying it, because I was going to have references to her skin having a bronze sheen in later stories.
That's fair.
Because she's a tall woman, and according to Country Kitchen, she's very good looking. But then they go planetside, and she's like, she completely ruins her looks wearing a sundress that just doesn't fit someone as tall as her.
Mm-hmm.
And having a wide brim hat. Essentially, I don't know if you've ever seen like the earlier episodes of Ranma 1/2, but it was I pictured when I wrote it this outfit that Akane would always wear that made her look a little bit like Little House on the Prairie almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so Milk Muffin is supposed to be this gorgeous woman that like is too nervous going planet side and doesn't really want to be in the sun that much, and so she completely covers up. And meanwhile, Country is just frustrated because Country wants to go shopping. She wants to try on different outfits. She wants to do all this fun stuff, and Milk Muffin is being a total drag.
Yeah.
But she's like, but it's okay because she came planetside. She's trying. She probably needs a beer or something. And they do end up like going off and having a drink. And at one point, Country Kitchen wants to do some of the fun stuff that she doesn't normally get to do because they spend months at a time on the ship. So she finds a fortune teller. She's like, yeah, what the hey, I'll go have a bit of carnival fun. And this ends up leading to the monster of the story, which this one is a little easier to just reveal. The Country on the Rocks one, not so much. This one doesn't matter as much. There is this gypsy-ish kind of fortune teller setup, a real carnival-looking setup, with a woman with a crystal ball.
Yep.
And shortly after...
The trope.
Yeah, exactly the trope. Heavy accent and everything. And her name is Madame Mommy. And I chose that name specifically because this is a creature that is actually a psychic parasite.
Mm-hmm.
And she thinks she's going in for a fake fortune telling. And the more she talks to this creature, the more it kind of gets into her head. And she's sort of like almost falling asleep and realizing she's having this out-of-body experience. And the next thing she knows, this creature has separated parts of her personality from her. So she can't tell that something bad is happening, but there's a separate part of her personality that's locked in this psychic cage that knows something bad is happening and is trying to warn her other self, who just doesn't get it because she's been locked in almost a childlike state, which is the joke of the story is supposed to be that's why she's called Madame Mommy.
Mm-hmm.
It's very kind of darkish humor.
Yeah, sure.
But, I didn't realize it when I was writing it at the time. But I'm guessing that the reason that most people would find this chapter weird, as one person told me, is because this is a very, like... what's the word I'm looking for? It's some weird fetishy thing, where it's like, you have this person that's an adult, but is trapped with the mind of a child. And I realized later on, as I went back and read it, I was like, oh, okay, I see why that person might have found this weird. But the whole point is that the child part of her was too innocent to tell that her life force was being drained by this creature. And this creature was taking on a parental role and having all these conversations with her that were meant to soothe that side of her, while the side of her that was frightened and trapped was slowly withering away. And in reality, she's in a coma, and Milk Muffin and Colas find her in this coma, and they can't do anything about it. And the whole story is like that, where no matter what they try to save her from this, they don't know what's going on. So there's nothing they can do. And it only ends up being by a freak coincidence where something happens when Milk Muffin falls asleep. Because of something she experienced, there's this other force that is able to scare that force away. And, you know, basically by the end of the story, you had just this psychic parasite that was unsuccessful. And the ending is sort of left with Country Kitchen and Milk Muffin never really knowing what exactly happened.
Right.
So that one was definitely the weirdest of the three. And I was intentionally wording things in that chapter as weird as possible to give the sense that Country Kitchen really, the first person perspective part of her in this story does not realize that she's essentially being killed.
Yeah.
And so that was the fun horror part of it that I enjoyed writing. I don't know.
Fun.
Do you have any other questions to field me before we get to the rest, or?
I mean, no. I think. I mean, you're kind of answering the question. You're kind of pre-answering the questions. I mean, just kind of like So I'm kind of left a little bit confused because I could have sworn that you wrote The Good Guy first, but maybe I'm just remembering you writing like the first part of The Good Guy first.
That may be the case.
Something like that.
I might have been, because I write multiple things at a time. So it's possible I showed you stuff before it was published that, was preempted by the Rackon.
Yeah. Well, it was a long enough time ago that I can't remember which one happened first. But yeah, anyway. No, I mean, you're doing a pretty good job of explaining stuff. So I would just say, keep going. What's the next story?
Well, just one thing I would say is this always happens. You say something like that, and now I'm wondering if I'm the crazy one, and I actually did publish The Good Guy first. But I'm pretty sure it was the Rackon first.
I just checked. You published the Rackon in like April, and then you published The Good Guy in December.
Okay, yeah, I thought so. So it wasn't that big of a difference, really. So I can see where it would. Yeah. Anyway, the third chapter. No, that wasn't the third chapter.
Yeah, we're going on to chapter 4.
Moving on to chapter 4.
The Climb.
I called it The Climb, and that was the chapter where I wanted a lot of the suspense to be in the actual physical danger that the crew was in.
Mm-hmm.
So in this story, it starts out with Country waking up. She doesn't know exactly what happened, but the gravity on the ship is pointing in the wrong direction.
Right.
They're at the front of the bridge, and Milk Muffin is collapsed on the side, and she's not moving. Country has injured herself. They took a fall because they must have been in their chairs, and the gravity changed, and they spilled over to the front of the room.
Mm-hmm.
So now Country is looking around, and she's not sure. She sees that Milk Muffin is alive. She's not sure what happened. She's not sure if Milk is injured to an excessive fatal degree or what have you.
Right.
So she doesn't seem to be able to get into contact with Colas, which is very strange because they should be able to contact him from anywhere in the ship.
Right.
He can announce himself from anywhere. He has connections to every part of the ship. He could fly the ship himself if he didn't have more important duties, just using his cyborg body. No communication.
There are jokes about that earlier in the book.
Yes, there are. So she has to do something about the situation. Normally, she is not the one that is doing anything about any situation. She's a bit more frightened of things. She's a bit of a weakling compared to the other two.
Yeah.
Milk is much more apt to dive into a dangerous scenario and try to solve the problem, even though she's the crazy one, and she might have a freak-out episode if they see something that reminds her of something she saw sometime long ago.
Right.
That can basically bring her to a dead halt. But Country is not usually the one that is rescuing anyone.
Mm-hmm.
She's sort of just there being a part of the circumstances and giving the viewpoint.
Yeah.
But now she has to take an active role. She has to climb back up to her seat somehow. And the floor is smooth. She's got a bit of an angle to work with, but it takes her a while. And she has an injured ankle to boot. So she's in incredible pain. And she's working her way back up to her desk because she suspects that Milk has some kind of drug that might alleviate the pain somewhere in her desk. So that's what she's going for. She's also got a bit of a plan forming in her mind as she starts to climb because she doesn't know how she's going to get to the other end of the room. It's basically, 2-3 stories up to the other side.
Yeah.
Which is also one of the jokes. One of the jokes at the beginning of the book is that she comes onto the Rackon, joins the crew as the head navigator, and asks a couple of questions like, well, who are the other navigators or something like that.
Yeah.
Only to find out that because Colas can operate most of the ship himself, there's no other crew. And her personality is wrapped up in a lot of her corporate princess life and her school life, her academics, and part of her training is that she did train to be a pilot to some degree.
Yeah. And
she knows her spaceships a little well, and she actually likes the Rackon as a spaceship. I called it a Tarsus 4. Now, you informed me after I wrote this book that is actually a ship that is used in another, I think you said Wing Commander?
So I'm pretty sure that the starting ship in Wing Commander Privateer is called the Tarsus. Or something much like that.
Yeah, that is incredible, because I've never played Wing Commander.
Privateer is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think I saw one of my friends playing Wing Commander 3 back when it came out on PlayStation, the one that had Mark Hamill.
The PlayStation version of that game was not a very good port.
I imagine so after hearing that it was originally PC. I was like, well, how did they do the controls? Because I know my PC controls for, flight sim style games.
Yeah, right.
But, I was just... it's not surprising that you try to make a sci-fi sounding spaceship name and you come up with one that's similar to one that another person has already used. So, no big surprise there. And I come from an era where we didn't have the internet to look all of this stuff up, so I didn't even think to type all these names into an internet search.
I mean, you shouldn't. It's fine.
So despite the fact that I have all these references to things that inspire these characters and things that I have in the stories...
actually, wait. Would you mind if I chime in for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
I wrote that story a while back. The Welcome to the Horne, the story about the devilish hotel kind of thing.
Yeah.
One of the room numbers that I had the main character go to is a room number that's prominent in the movie and book The Shining, and I didn't know that.
Oh, that's great.
So, that was brought to my attention at some point, and I was like, huh, that's a very strange coincidence. But anyway.
You'll be dead, and someone will be on Super YouTube X in the future talking about how you must have been influenced greatly by that movie because of this one reference, and then they'll start relating all of your works to this one Stephen King adaptation. Ugh. That's how that's going to go down.
I mean, I'd prefer if they related me to... I found it amusing that
of all the things that were based off of other things in my books that didn't make direct references, the one thing that directly correlates with a name that something else has was not a reference.
Right. It just seems to happen. I don't know why.
Yeah. By the way, The Horne is a great story, and
it was a fun one. Yes, it's based on a true story too.
Very good imagery. And it's funny that you said it was based on a true story, because it is based on a true story.
Yeah.
But if you read it, you'll wonder how.
Exactly. More things happened in that story that are based on reality than you would think.
Let's just say that I thought I was the only one that had the super awesome fever dreams, and I was thoroughly impressed by...
I mean, very little of that book is a fever dream. Very much of that book is stuff that actually happened to me in a real hotel where I was going for a conference, and it was like, what? Anyway.
No, well, there is a fever dream part of it, though, in the story.
Sure.
Not in your real life adventure, but
right.
Yeah. So I think my point was that in Morelia's capsizing,
Mm-hmm.
at first Country is like, oh, this is a Tarsus 4. Those are really solid ships, and they're great cargo ships, and they can hold like this many people. And so there's
some cool architecture to the ship too. Like there's this whole like room that's like open to space but not.
Yeah, they use stretch fields and shielding to allow them to have a deck at the top of the ship where they can go out and just view space.
Yeah.
Like you're standing on a deck.
Yeah,
a
right.
Porch somewhere.
It's very weird, but kind of a cool idea.
Yeah, so she likes this ship, but she also comments how she thinks that the paint job that the owner gave it was absolutely hideous. It was like pink and red, and this is just a Milk Muffin thing where, as you look at Milk Muffin in the story, she's not incredibly feminine. She's sort of aloof and very, very business-minded when she's being sensible, but she's also easy to get along with. But you wouldn't really view the rest of what she does in the story and then think, oh, this is a person who wants to paint her ship pink and red.
Right.
Yeah, so it was just kind of a clashing joke that also allowed me to have Country put off by the fact that anyone would ruin a classic ship like a Tarsus 4.
Right.
And there's a lot of little things that Country says throughout the story that are just little world-building bits like that are partly jokes and partly fleshing things out so that you get a broader scope of the universe that she's in.
Right.
I believe in... Well, no, that's the next chapter. So in The Climb, she ends up removing a part of her seat that holds it to the floor when they're in space and they have the gravity. The gravity is not doing anything, which, again, the stretch fields are used to...
It's not that the gravity's not doing anything, it's the gravity's doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, and...
Because it's like off in the wrong direction, which is making it very hard to... Because if it were just 0G, it'd be like, well, I'm going to push off this wall in the right direction. But no, you wake up with your ankle busted, and now the pointed end of the bridge is like the bottom, and you just have these smooth metal surfaces in all directions, and you're like, oh hell.
Right. So rather than sitting there and dying, she fidgets with her chair after she finds some of Milk Muffin's drugs, which basically creates another joke, because she starts off by saying, okay, I know what they do to her. I'm just going to take half of this and hope the pain goes away.
Right.
It works for a while. The joke to that is, I'll go ahead and spoil that joke. Later in the story, at the end of the story, actually, Milk Muffin says, you're actually supposed to take the whole thing. It will really mess with you if you only take half. And she's like, oh, well, that explains it. So... Just little fun things are everywhere in those books like that. No, that one book. Those stories.
Those stories, yeah.
So she has to rip a magnet out of her chair to make the climb about, 2 stories up the bridge of the ship to get to a door that will lead her to the corridors where she can hopefully find Colas and figure out what's going on.
Yeah. There's
also this other threat of something hanging from the other end of the room that is directly above Milk Muffin. And... Country's not in any shape to really get them out of the way because of the dome structure at the point. So she has to climb up there and investigate. It ends up not being a problem because of the way it's secured to the other side of the room. But the whole time she's climbing, she's worried about this thing falling. And I dragged out that climbing scene just to give a sense of how worried she was about everything.
And also because you were a big fan of that Stallone movie.
Cliffhanger?
Yeah.
I've never seen Cliffhanger. I'm just assuming that would be the movie. That movie has been on my list of movies I should watch for over 25 years, and I just never remember it.
I didn't even remember the name of the movie. I just remembered Stallone was in it and hoped you would fill in the blank.
Well, it worked.
It did work.
Yeah, and for those of us who don't know, me and Rudy have known each other a long time, and we often know what the other's thinking, and we don't know how. It's just really weird.
To the point where we will sometimes say the same sentence at the same time.
Yeah.
we did. We stop that.
we said like a whole 15-word sentence word for word one time and got to the end of it and just sort of looked at each other. And that wasn't the first time you said it, but that was definitely one of the prominent times where you looked at me and said, stop doing that. So she gets to the corridor. There's a bunch of problems in the corridor. There's a drop off down one hallway where she can't really get past. There's a bunch of doors she needs to open, but she has to be careful because some of them are above her and there might be stuff inside that'll drop on her. She's essentially looking for ropes and things that she can use to climb. One of the other character traits that Milk Muffin has is that she's very promiscuous. And so at one point, Country does find a room that has some rope in it, and she's a little off-put by some of the things she finds in there. But she's like, "Oh, it's okay, fine. I have a rope now. Let's just move on and not think about it."
Right.
It's a very fun book, and it's the one that certain crowds would definitely try to cancel me over if they had a good look at Milk Muffin's character, and bring it on because she's a great character.
Yeah.
So she gets through this whole climb. I'm not going to say everything that happens, obviously, but she has other things upset her injury, and the drugs wear off, and she starts panicking, and then she finally makes it to the engine room where she thinks that Colas will be, because she knows that Colas wouldn't have put them directly in danger, but she also knows that it was very likely Colas who had to turn the gravity the way that he did. He's the only one on the ship that really could do it, and he wouldn't have done it without a darn good reason. Right. And the fact that she can't communicate with him either means that it has to mean that there's a reason either he's in danger or it would put them in danger to communicate with them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've read that story, so the only thing I'm going to have to ask is, do you think that I should spoil the monster in the story? Because it's a bit weird why everything happened overall.
I mean, we're more than halfway through. I think that spoilers should start to diminish at this point.
Okay. So yeah, there's a monster, and it caused things to happen, and the majority of the fun in that story is Country's struggle to get to the end of the story, and the monster is just the fun cherry on the top.
Right.
I tried to come up with something that was a little original, something it's scary to think about the extent that it could have, but it's also something that doesn't have that extent without certain circumstances. So it's always a threat that's out there that humanity might have to deal with one day. Right. And that's the climb. She finds Colas. He's in a bit of a situation that fully warrants him not communicating with anyone, and they solve the problem, and we move on to the next chapter, which is Contact Mankind.
Yep.
I was a little miffed when working on this one. Not really miffed, but more like I thought I had come up with this really fun idea for a monster.
Mm-hmm.
When I had I came up with this idea, and I think there was an episode of Doctor Who where there were these creatures called the Silence that you couldn't remember once you looked away from them.
Yeah.
And so as I'm writing this story, I see this episode, and I'm just like, oh, well, I can't stop now. I've got a good thing in here, and I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
So, but everyone's going to think that I took this idea from this, when in reality, I do have this monster where proximity is the basis for whether or not you can remember it. It's not seeing it.
Yeah.
But there was a scene in an anime called Nichijou. It's pretty famous, so if you're an anime fan, you'll know what it is.
It's a daily life comedy. It's extremely good. It messes around with like fantasy elements at times, to the point where like there are some gags in that show that are not, like, for a show that is typically, and it's based off of a comic, of course, but like for something that's based off of such kind of a daily life kind of, I mean, Nichijou means daily life, so
yeah,
it's for a show that's usually that grounded. They get into some situations and they get into some exaggerations, and they make some skits and stuff that involve things that are very much out there, and that's part of what makes that particular series very fun.
Indeed, and we need to do an episode on Nichijou one day.
I'll put it on the list.
Yeah, add it to the list, and there is a monster in this chapter. In this chapter, there is, or in Nichijou, there is a scene in the cartoon and in the comic, but I saw it in the cartoon first,
Sure.
Where you have this robot girl who is trying to fit in with humans, and she doesn't want anyone to know she's a robot. But the professor, who is like an 8-year-old girl, the professor that built her, always adds these weird functions to her that makes it obvious she's a robot.
Right.
One of those functions in one of the skits that they did, one of those functions was that when something surprising or shocking happens, the robot girl would bounce off the walls, Daffy Duck style, in surprise.
Right.
And that was actually where this creature came from. The idea in my head as I was writing it was that this was going to be a creature that it had a long history of doing something for it was something that was built by another race.
Mm-hmm.
And it had a history of doing things, but it wasn't supposed to be discovered. And so anyone that did discover it, anytime they like made a noise that of shock or screamed, or because you would scream if you saw this thing, or some people would, or they'd shout, obviously someone would do something.
Right. People would react to it.
Any kind of noise would cause this creature to be hurled away from where the noise was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
At speeds that were incredible enough that it had to be some ridiculously higher technology. It would just vanish, and so nobody would ever remember it.
Right.
But because of the way the story was structured, it was all about how they were going to be doing a mission, but they were going to be rescuing a ship that had taken some damage somewhere. The ship itself, not so important as everything going on inside the Rackon while they were doing this rescue.
Mm-hmm.
Country Kitchen is looking for a snack. She asks Milk Muffin if there's any chocolate, and she says, oh, there's this other room that has storage that I probably have some in. And she goes down there, she finds a bunch of chocolate, and she gets all giddy about it, and then she finds, I believe I called them discomfort seeds, which you eat them, and for 15 minutes you have a really, discomforting feeling. Kind of like if you got, a cortisone injection or something, and it would last for 15 minutes, and then you'd be fine.
Okay.
And so she's going down to this room, and as she's heading down there, or as she's coming back, she realizes she's sweating, and her legs are kind of aching, and she kind of offhand says, oh, wait, why have I been running? Why was I running? And she doesn't think much about it, and she just continues on. And this happens a couple of times where they go back and forth down this hallway to this room. And she keeps having these moments where something would happen, and she'd start talking to one of the other crew members, and they'd be like, well, what's wrong? She's like, oh, no, nothing's wrong. I guess I felt like talking or something. It goes on for a little bit.
Yeah.
But the reader gets the pleasure of the moment where Country hears some knocking, and all of a sudden that's when she starts panicking because it causes her to remember something.
Yeah.
So what's happening is every time she becomes aware that something is nearby, she becomes aware of the memories that she had of running into it earlier. And that story, the real fun of that story is everything that happens building up to them realizing there's a creature trapped in their ship. Yeah. And they don't know what it is, but they know that if they walk away from it, they will forget it's there.
Right.
So they just have these moments of going to rescue this other ship, and Milk Muffin does a spacewalk and hears this thing banging on the outside of the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another one of them things where it's sound through the hull, and so it causes Milk Muffin to start floating away, and she's floating into a dangerous area, and Country has to take a running leap and go rescue her because Milk Muffin's suit is perfectly capable of getting her back to where it needs to be.
Mm-hmm.
But she's having an episode, which doesn't normally happen when she's on these missions.
Right.
And since they've all forgotten about whatever it was by the time they get back to the ship, Country is really angry because up until this point, Milk Muffin has been pretty good about not letting things go wrong when they're on a mission. And so now Country is saying things like, I might have to quit this job and everything, and I just you're putting us in danger and all that fun nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
But then she goes off to take a break, and that's when they finally Country Kitchen manages to hear the sound and put together a couple of she makes a couple connections and figures out a way that she can temporarily remember what's going on long enough to get everyone else involved. And from there, they kind of deal with this creature. So
right.
That's the gist of that chapter, without spoiling any of the real fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I did sort
and
of
that
give
one is
away...
a fun one, yeah.
Yeah, oh, that one is really fun. It's not... I think The Climb was my favorite to write. That one moment in Country on the Rocks was my favorite in the story. This one is a close second, was my second favorite to write, and I really enjoyed the monster in this one, because it was neither a good or bad monster in that sense, once you find out everything about it. The final chapter, straight up ghost story. It is pretty much... I don't know. I guess it was kind of a depressing note to go out on, because a lot of the chapter is just Country feeling bad about someone that she knew that died when they were in school. And she talks about it in that chapter, how she was inventing things that were going to change the course of human history. And then, bam, she's just dead. And Country was there working with her when it happened. And it's just like, yeah, there's just nothing you could do about it. And so Milk tells her to take a break. And she says, yeah, at some point, Country... has her own little freak out episode where she like hallucinates her friend, and she's like, yeah, I got to take a break for a while, because I'm just like, I've been in space too long, all this other stuff. And so Milk says, you go take a break. She gives her some expensive wine. It's kind of funny, the weird relationship they have in the story, because Milk is handing her this ludicrously expensive wine, but at the same time, it's something that Country could afford with pocket change, given the fact that her father is one of the richest men in the known universe.
Right.
So it's just kind of... It's one of the jokes in the story that Country is like, I know how much this stuff is worth. How does she have this much money?
Yeah, right.
So she's sitting down having a drink, and she kind of hallucinates the ghost again. She's like, okay, Milk Muffin is with her at the end of the story, and she's like, okay, I'm kind of having this freak out again, but whatever. It's just, I really just need a break, and Milk is here, so everything's going to be good. And her friend says some really weird things to her about something horrible happening and something coming, and then she just vanishes, and Country's just like, what was that about? And then Milk is just sitting there, just staring, and Country's like, what's wrong? And Milk says, that you did just see that, right? And she's like, wait, that was real?
Yeah,
And so she actually saw the ghost of her friend, with some weird bit of science about what was going on with the stretch fields is what this girl was working on, and she was doing weird things with teleportation. And it was kind of a story like... It's meant to be a story where, oh, this teleportation stuff opened something in another dimension. And so this girl didn't necessarily really die. She's just trapped somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the 6th chapter. And I did what I really like to do with a lot of these, where it could have been the last book that I wrote for that. I do have plans to do another. I've already started it, in fact. But I would often finish stories leaving an opening like that, where it's like, I could do more with that if I wanted to, but I don't have to, because there's a lot that's implied with this appearance of this friend at the end of the book.
Yeah, with the way that this ends, if someone asks you what happens next, you could just be like, well, Cthulhu ate them all. The end.
Yeah.
Go away.
Because I think someone did a review for both this and The Good Guy, where they were like, I can't wait for the next one. And I had not planned for a next one for either of those. They're in the works now, but they hadn't been planned at the time.
Sure.
Like, when I read the review for the Rackon, it's just like, I'm looking forward to the next one, and it's like, I wasn't planning on the next one, but...
Uh-oh.
And then you think about it, it's like, yeah, that ending really did imply that there was going to be more going on.
Yeah. Well, the way that it's written as like a collection of short stories also suggests that there could be another collection of short stories sometime in the future.
Yeah. And
that flesh out more of the world. It's a little bit harder to expect another 250,000 word follow-up to The Good Guy, but for something like this, where it's like, yeah, this is 6 relatively short stories collected together into one reasonably sized, novel, then it's like, well, write a short story or 3 and publish them or something. Or don't, whatever. They all got hit by Cthulhu.
Yeah. Well, I've got some really good ideas for the second Rackon story. I'm just going to give it a basic name like Return to the Rackon,
Mm-hmm.
which it's a basic name, but it also will be an important part of probably the opening chapter. There's a reason
Mm-hmm.
that it's called Return to the Rackon.
Rackon Redux.
Yeah, the good guy, I mean, there's not at the moment any direct sequel planned. There is more I'm going to do with the characters. And I did do a
Well,
short
that's kind of,
story
yeah.
spin-off with not with all the main cast, but I took Rizgelda and Tammy and I gave them their own little side story.
Sure, but like, you would kind of expect. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where like I could see the like the sequel to The Good Guy being about someone else, because we kind of, you kind of went through that character's Ray Perel's motivation and adventure, and it would almost make sense. It would kind of make sense for it to be someone else's turn, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I did leave a bunch of the ending with a bunch of characters doing things that imply that there'll be more.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the time I was like, I might do something with it, I might not. But I'm already so the next follow-up is not going to be another 250k word
Sure.
extravaganza, but it's already at 100k and it's almost finished. And it does not feature any of the characters from The Good Guy except for Ibralina, Ray Perel's
Right.
cousin, is the main
Right.
character in this story. And it's another cast of 3. I like doing casts of 3 because it gives you good opportunity to flesh out multiple characters.
Mm-hmm.
And it also gives you like the straight man, the fool, and the other character that can bounce off of either one and
Mm-hmm.
play whatever role you need.
Sure.
And it'll be the first time I publish a long novel with third person perspective as the full novel. So that was like my go-to in the day. I used to write everything third person, and the Rackon was really one of the first person ones I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are advantages and disadvantages to the technique.
Yeah,
We can talk about that at a later date.
It's definitely fun to toy around with different styles. I know there's a lot of people that will use the same style at all times, and that can work, especially if you have a niche audience and they're expecting similar things every time.
Right.
I have a lot of the similar tone in what I write, but nothing that I actually write is very similar in what kind of story it is.
Sure, and no audience, so there's that too.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm writing for a no audience, not a niche audience. But I fully approve of the style of... So the Good Guy ends with the idea that it doesn't stop there, because the whole book is a progression of... It starts in this town, and Ray Perel moves from one adventure to the next, and everything gets larger than life the further you go. And then at the very end, it's like, oh, and there's still other places that he's going to go, but those have yet to be written.
I mean, it's like the ending to Dragon Ball. These fights will certainly continue.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. And they probably should have ended it at Z, but whatever.
I mean, most people are mostly in agreement with that, but yes.
Well, the people that are making a killing off of how it continued are not in agreement with that, and I can't blame them.
Well, no, but they're an extreme minority.
Yes, that's also true. But the people that are paying them that money are not in an extreme minority, so people are still enjoying a lot of Dragon Ball.
Well, I mean, there's still stuff to enjoy. It's just that it's not.
It's not the same. That's for sure.
It doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, it really doesn't. I don't know. I'm a big fan of the non-ending ending where it's like things worked out, but there could always be more. You never know.
Yeah. Well, from an author's perspective, that's kind of a wise choice. Like, as opposed to like, Hamlet 2 is a joke for a reason. Right?
Yeah.
So.
It'll be a fun ride. Like I said, I've got some good ideas for the next Rackon story. Technically the sequel to The Good Guy is Ibralina in the Pixie Lands, and what happens at the end of The Good Guy with Ibralina. It's just I took all of the characters that were in the story and gave them these very short moments in the last chapter that described what they did after the main events took place.
Yeah.
And one of them was Ibralina and her friends finding a book that opened a vortex, And so that's kind of where I picked off. That had nothing to do with the rest of the good guy, but that's where we're going next. So
Yeah, and they meet the two missing Cinnamon Toast Crunch chefs.
yeah, exactly. That's kind of where I was going with that. I just wanted them to find good cereal by the end of the book.
You serialized it. Your story.
I did. I'm serializing the stories. It's kind of like here's an idea I'm throwing out for free. I worked with a guy who, we were putting boxes of grills up on shelves, and we were talking about some of the books that we'd read and some of the ones I'd written, and he goes, "You know what you should write next?" And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"What?" He goes, "You should write some thriller novels." I was like, "I like thriller novels. I'll probably try and write something like that at some point." He goes, "Yeah, but and we're putting these boxes of grills up." He goes, "Yeah, but you should make them barbecue themed, and you should call them psychological grillers."
Okay. A lot of hard questions in the story.
Yeah. I just thought it was a really well placed pun for what we were doing at the time, and so we just kept
Absolutely.
joking about it for like a year. We kept joking about the psychological grillers and coming up with weird ideas that you could put in them.
Right. All right. Well, any last thoughts, words you want to pass on to anyone who might want to go take a look at the Rackon?
It was a fun book to write, and I don't really write things like a lot of people want to write things and have this deep message, or they want to have characters that are allegories for things, and yeah, I got to have the themes.
My themes.
Everything I write is just so the person reading it can have fun.
Insert Libertarian Roads meme comic.
Yeah. It's like my style of writing a lot of it can be summed up in, imagine every time that you're sitting down watching a movie and you think, oh, it would have been cool if this happened. Kind of like, it's like writing fan fiction in your head, but it's the fan fiction that you don't actually sit down to write. You're watching something and you're like, if I was going to do a story, I would take that idea and I would do it this way. And that's what I do with everything I write.
Well, that's how inspiration and new stories kind of sort of work. Like, right? Like, some of the things that are great are made because someone saw something and said, oh, that gives me an idea. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, yeah, there might be a hero's journey in there. It doesn't invalidate the story as a work of something that someone might want to look at.
Yeah.
That kind of like postmodernist, everything has already been written perspective is incredibly destructive.
Yeah, some people want to replicate the works of Dostoevsky and the themes and philosophy therein. And I just want to write the thing that if I was reading, I would say, oh, this is a really cool world. I want to know more about it, and I want to see what these characters do in this world.
Right.
And so that's what I did with sci-fi horror in the Rackon. And
good stuff.
And having said that, it's just, one more time I'll say, do you have any questions that you would ask if you personally knew the author of the Rackon? What would you ask him?
What the hell were you thinking?
I am a madman. Everything I do should be scrutinized and probably given to the authorities.
Everything that you do should be placed into a clear file labeled evidence and appear in a courtroom.
Pretty much.
I mean, the thing is though, like if you have a padded room, it doesn't matter which direction gravity is pointing.
That's very true. And Milk Muffin could use a padded room, so maybe they should consider that. I could make that a joke in a future story. I'm not even kidding.
Go for it.
So one of the things that happened here is I did give a lot of things that spoil parts of the stories, but the important things that I left out was there are so many jokes and weird callbacks and references and character traits to everyone in these stories that I did not mention. And those are really what make the story worth reading. The thoughts going through Country's head as she's in the climb, trying to figure out how she's going to solve the problem on the ship, and all the things that she thinks about Colas and Milk Muffin throughout the stories, and all the little jokes that happen, all the teasing that she gets from Milk Muffin, because Milk Muffin is a chronic sexual harasser and teaser to Country Kitchen in these stories.
Mm-hmm.
And despite the fact that she literally relies on her as a crutch to get through even easy times.
Right.
And Country does not forget about that the whole time this book is going on. She's like, yep, babysitting the psychopath again.
It's fun, until the psychopath finds a knife.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was another part that I didn't mention, which isn't the biggest part of that part of the story, but it is an important piece of kind of where it wraps up.
Right.
So there's definitely a lot worth looking at, and it's all done in a non-depressing, very fun, let's play around with these characters.
Like, weirdly non-depressing. Like, this book is strange. People should read it.
Well, every review I get of it is someone saying... So actually, the first review I got was someone saying, this is strange but good sci-fi. Like strange seems to be what I get a lot from it, and I'm very happy with that.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, like you said, zero readership, but if anyone ever does read it, they're going to get something a little different.
Right.
I challenge anyone to find something that was similar.
It's got a very unique tone and a very unique structure and very unique activities. There's a little bit of like stuff. As you mentioned, there's like stuff that is references to other things and things that are not references but look like references. But that's just how it happens sometimes.
Yeah, I can't believe that. I can't believe the Genos thing. That is. I don't know if I had seen One Punch Man at the time, though.
No, I don't think you had, because this was 2000 or something like that.
Well, no, I wrote this in I published it in 2016, I think.
2016, 2017, something like that, yeah.
I don't remember how much of One Punch Man. I don't remember how much of One Punch Man was out by then, so I might not have even known who Genos is. I'm sure that if I had, there's a possibility I might have made that joke.
Maybe, but I feel like I guess I could be wrong. We've seen my perception of time be incorrect, so maybe this is something that you could have. But it feels like it was like, okay, no, it's just my sense of time is messed up, which is probably a good segue into closing out the episode. So yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone. We will see you next time with some other fun writing goodness, but until then,
if we haven't totally turned everyone off from science fiction, and if we haven't already been canceled by anti-spoiler people, then yes, we can definitely say that we have been successful here.
Yeah. All right. Good stuff. All right, everybody. See you next week. Have a good one.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.